Hello and welcome to the She Reads Romance Books podcast, the ultimate show for romance book lovers looking for the best books worth reading. I'm your host, Leslie Murphy, and in each short episode, I share my favorite book list of recommendations so you know exactly what to add to your must-read list. Join me as I explore the romance genre and have fun collecting book boyfriends along the way, because life is better with a love story. Hello, readers. I am so excited that you are joining me today for the She Reads Romance Books podcast because it is a special episode. It's going to be a fun one, not only because of the topic that we are exploring today, but because I have a very special guest who is beyond hilarious, which only makes sense since she's a comedy writer and performer. She is the host of the awesome podcast, Too Stupid to Live, and she's a romance reader who has been reading a particular brand of romance that we are going to talk about today. So welcome to the podcast, Becky Feldman.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh my gosh. I've been super excited for this too. But then I was like preparing for it and I'm like, oh my gosh, Becky went to Emerson College. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Did you like Boston?
I loved Boston. I
Yeah.
loved it not in the winter, but I do miss it. It was such a quirky, great city.
I lived there for like 20 some years. We moved
Wow.
3 years ago to here. Yeah. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, I wonder if, had to do the traditional swan boats, and the Mike's
Mhm.
pastry, like all that fun stuff.
Oh,
So
I miss Mike's Pastry. I miss Pizzeria Regina.
very fun. Yay.
Yeah.
Well, super excited again to have you here today and especially to discuss our topic. How do you feel about the fact that when I thought, hey, I want to do a podcast episode on monster romance, that you immediately came to mind?
Couldn't be more flattered. Couldn't be like when you think monsters, you picture my face. No, no, it's so flattering. I'm so excited. It's just something I'm obsessed with. It's my latest hyper fixation, I guess.
Although I kind of feel like maybe we should take a quick segue because, following you on Instagram, you showed off your beautiful haircut. I love it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
But then you also just dropped the bomb about giant erotica.
Yep.
Tell me more.
Okay.
What is
So obviously, I think like a lot of your readers, I belong to Facebook groups of like reading groups, and so I'm in this group called Full Peen Ahead, like monster and smut lovers, and every Friday, or I think so, there's like a list of free books that authors are like putting up that, they're just like promoting to their fans to get them interested. And so Sarah Ivy Hill, I think, had her like a novella in her Ice Giants series available for free. And I was like, I've never read giant erotica before. Like, I feel like maybe you know, I don't know, like maybe like a few years ago, like I heard about the idea of like kind of the fetish of like being into like giant women and that whole thing and like, whatever. But I've never read like monster giant erotica tailored toward a female audience before. And I was so curious and I read it and like in a day, it was a short story. And I honestly haven't been able to stop thinking about it in a very good way. Because, like, people are like, "Well, how? How does that work?" And it's just like, they work it out, don't worry. Like all couples, like all relationships, you find a way around the obstacles, and I'm like, "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever read."
we ever had a doubt? Just go with it, right? Giant
Exactly.
erotica. Yes.
Yeah,
Embrace it
you
all.
just embrace it all, make it work, come up with a plan, just don't stand there and say, "I can't, this isn't gonna work." You work around your differences.
And then you as you're reading, you pause and you okay, let me think about this. Like how, what? Yeah. And then you just, embrace that too. Exactly.
Yeah, because like, the author does do the answering for you. Do you know what I
Our
mean? There's a lot of, like I think with, like, monster romance, like, I think for maybe people who don't at least for me, when I first discovered it, your first question is like, "How?
Yes.
How?"
Yes.
And it's answered. There's nothing to worry about.
Okay, good. Good, good,
Yeah.
good. Well, as I said, you're no stranger to reading monster romance or talking about, sexy monster romance on your podcast. Can you tell listeners a little bit about Too Stupid to Live? We'll start there first.
Sure. Yeah. My podcast is Too Stupid to Live. It's a podcast that reviews romance novels, $5 and under. I also host interviews with your favorite authors and soon to be favorite authors. And it's just a great time where I get my friends to read a book that's cheap, discuss it with me. And yeah, that's the show pretty much. I mean, and I go off on tangents all the time, as you can probably tell by this point, but it's a wild ride.
I love it. And I mean, I particularly love, the $5 or less stipulation. My money saving sensibilities really embrace that. Thank you.
Hmm.
And I think this is a topic that fully fits into that, embrace the Kindle Unlimited subscription or, you can find the free novellas or whatever. So
Hmm.
Box should not hold you back from monster romance.
No, there's so much available, and I think that with my podcast and just being able to, like, find these new gems, it's such a great way to discover new authors. There's a lot of, like, if you know how, like, when people are like, "Oh, go to, good like a thrift store and you just gotta, like, weed through all the stuff to find these gems. Like, I feel like it's kind of the same thing where you have to put in a little more effort to find these free books, like follow authors on Instagram or follow authors that other authors follow and see how they're selling free stuff. It is a bit of a commitment, but not too much.
No, exactly. Do you have, I mean, obviously, besides the time I was on the podcast, do you have a favorite episode that you just stands out in your mind?
Oh gosh, all my episodes are my favorite. I guess I have a friend, my best friend Courtney is coming back on the show for that episode that I'm putting out soon. And so I like kind of promoted an episode we did on dinosaur erotica, which that was kind of the first interspecies, I think. I could be wrong. It was kind of what I think is the first like interspecies romance we discussed. And it was just a wild time. And we both were listening to it and we recorded it back in 2015 or whenever pre-pandemic, pre everything else and just, like, thinking about, like, we were so, like, light and free then.
Takes you back to those carefree times, of course.
Exactly.
Well, okay, talking about well, again, you do the I would say not only to tune into your podcast because of Dinosaur Erotica and all of your fun episodes, but I said this to you earlier, you give the best intros to your podcast episodes, it's like where you shine, and I
Oh.
thought for, like, a hot minute. I'm like, "I'm gonna try that for, like" and Becky and I'm like, "No, no, that's her shtick. I can't even, like, attempt." So, people need to tune in because they're awesome, and so it'll be a blast. Tune
Aw,
in.
thank you.
Yeah, Too Stupid to Live, I love it. But, okay, monster romance. Are you ready to dive in?
Oh, yeah.
What so when I think of, like so I was brand new to this very recently because it's, like, all the rage. What does it really kinda mean to you? Are you kind of like a
Mhm.
stickler, like, this is what monster romance or this is not? Like, what do you think it is?
For me, I think what it is like for me, I find it very political, and I know that's like, you're like, "What?" But I think, like, you're at how do I just where do I start? I think for me and maybe a lot of other readers, like, we are spoon-fed kind of mythological stories and fairy tale narratives that kind of help us our brains shape what is dangerous, what is safe, right? And we kind of grow up living our lives kind of using these stories, using these narratives to kind of help us navigate through the world. But I think naturally human beings have this curiosity about like, well, what is this danger that you're talking about? And I also think that we're also like we think about sex too, and we're sexual beings. And I think like the idea of like having some sort of like sexual or romantic kind of moments with that dangerous thing is just really intriguing to people. And I think monster romance kind of gives you that opportunity to kind of flirt, dare I say, with the dangerous stuff. I think when I talk to other readers about monster romance, I think they like the fact that like they're just asking the question of like, oh, what if instead of the Prince Charming being the hero of the story, it's the monster being the hero of the story? There's like role reversal, it's taboo, and I think that it's a lot of fun to read.
Yeah, definitely. So do you think the monster, like, in your mind, does he have to be, like, a monster 24/7? Or does that,
Mm.
like, then if he's not, blur into, like, shapeshifter romance, or is
Yeah.
it alien romance its own thing? Like, I don't know. Or is it all just sort of lumped together? What do you think?
Yeah, you ask a good question, and I think, like, for me, I think we're still kind of, like, figuring it out because I lump alien romance and monster romance into one. In my brain, I call it humanoid romance.
Oh, yes, like
Um,
that. Okay.
yeah, but I could be, there's other people out there who are actually writing it and just, like, forming the culture of monster romance way better than I could be, but I think for me, I think for, like, something to be a proper romance, the monster in the romance cannot pass as human. So it has to have so he or she has to have some sort of thing where it's like you're walking down the street on a date and the people are thinking that is not a human being that person is with. That said, I have read a book. I did read a book recently where, to be fair, it's gargoyle romance, and gargoyles, as we know, can only come alive at night. But the happily ever after was that during the day he's human, but then so they can like have brunch or something, and then at night he becomes the gargoyle. And so I was like, I'll allow this.
Absolutely. We don't have to be complete sticklers, but yes,
Right.
yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Well, diving into the rabbit hole, I was kind of like, okay, well, what kind of monsters are out there? Like, what are we talking about with this whole monster culture? And I mean, I discovered fish people,
Yep.
orcs, minotaurs, and then spiders. I'm like, okay, spiders didn't even like register on my brain
I
until I
did
got,
Spider, yeah.
did
I
you?
I did do Tiffany Roberts recently, I think it's called Ensnared, it's like the Spider Mate series. I don't like bugs, I don't like spiders, I don't like and I know some people like spiders. I hate things that just enter your house without asking, and they're small, and they think they deserve anyway. So, I think because I'm so disgusted by spiders and, like, insects, I was like, okay, well, now that I think this means I have to read this and, like, how will I be affected by it? And I will say there were, like, I believed in the love story. It was, like, really fascinating. Like, the book itself is, like, great world building and, it's sexy. It is sexy. I think that, like, when, like, spider, like, body parts are described or, like, they describe the man as being, like, as chittering around like a spider, and, like, that I felt, like, disgusted, but, like, in a really good way, you know what I mean? Like, I don't I don't know how to describe it, like, it was kind of just, like, I don't know, like, getting to the things that I find grotesque, it was, like, kind of pushing my buttons in a way that was, like,
Yeah.
fun to question doing it in a book as opposed to, like, "Well, let me just, like, sleep outside in the woods with a bunch of real ass spiders." I'm not gonna do that.
Right, right. Well, and to your point at the beginning, like, taking a different view on the things that are dangerous or whatever. But yeah, I'm not sure that it could change my view on spiders or ants or no, I'm not quite
No.
sure. No.
Yeah.
Are there any kind of monsters that you've come across that, you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't think that either. Like I said, there was a few that popped out and I'm like, what? Like, what else am I missing?
Well, I think orc romance is kind of, a main thing. I think the idea of orcs and the way they exist, I find so fascinating. And if you listen to my podcast, you're probably just going to think it's an orc podcast at this point. Like, we'll review like Emily Henry, and I'm like, well, orcs, blah blah blah. So I think there is a fascination with that. I haven't read this yet, but I did come across a scarecrow romance. I have to read that. I did read recently there was a golem romance. I don't know if you know what a golem is. Do people know what that is?
No,
So,
you tell.
in the Jewish culture, there's this kind of folk story about like this idea that someone can create a guardian out of like mud to be this like strong person to protect, Jewish people. But usually in those stories, like it's like kind of like like kind of like these golems are like the Hulk in a way where they're so dumb and they try so hard to protect people that they end up killing innocent. It's kind of another kind of Jewish folklore that kind of, again, like shapes culture and all this stuff. So I did read a golem romance recently. It wasn't the golem wasn't destroying everything. Obviously, it was updated and sexy and all that stuff. But I was really excited to see that because that was one kind of monster tale. I mean, I was raised Jewish, and so it was like kind of one like element of like a fairy tale or a narrative or a folk story that I always wanted to see. And I'm so glad it finally came out. I loved reading it. I was so glad it was there. I hope to see more. So yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, absolutely. Well, in addition to like the different monsters that are you can find in monster romance, let's talk about whether they can be spicy or sweet, right?
Mhm.
Because I totally admit that I went into this category with a complete bias that
Yes.
all monster romance books were going to be like in the smut category. Like,
Mhm.
bring on the spice, I want a high spice with all the crazy appendages going in all the various places for
Yes.
her pleasure, right?
Yeah.
But then the few that I jumped into, I was like, "Wait a second, like, where is the spice?" It's
Mm. Mhm.
like, this is a very nice monster, and I like him, but, like, this is not what I was expecting.
Right. Yeah.
No, I don't know. Did you kinda go into it with that same thing, or is it just me?
No, I did go into it with the same thing. Like, I think, the first kind of foray into it, I was kind of gripped by, like, CM Nakasta and, like, Finley
Mhm.
Fan of people like, "Are you reading this shit? It's so disgusting. It's so smutty. It's so hot." Like, not disgusting. I mean it in a
Yeah.
reverent way of, like, it's really spicy. And so I guess maybe, yeah, I did have that assumption that there was like, think like shit was gonna get weird. I hope I can curse. Is it okay if I curse?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. Like, stuff is gonna get, weird. But then all of a sudden, like, I did read a book recently where I think what CM Nakasta and, like, other authors are doing are it's a very fun trope where they take kind of like a Hallmark story or a small town romance story where it's really quaint, it's really sweet. They live in these utopian resort towns. Everyone loves each other, but it happens to be monsters. And in CM Nakasa's books, they're also all so horny and they have crazy sex and there's a lot of fluids and there's everything, but they're also during the day like nice people contributing to this utopia. But I did read one recently where it was that, but then the insane sex wasn't there. It was just like a nice story about a woman moving to a town full of orcs. I was like, I enjoyed it a lot. But I was surprised that it wasn't as dirty, not dirty in
Yes.
a good way or spicy as some of the other books I've read.
Yeah. Well, okay, you mentioned Sienna Costa. So I read, what is it? Morning Glory Milking
Mhm.
Farm, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, "Okay, Minotaur, like, I'm all in, like,
Mhm.
bring it. I wanna see what this is all about," some 20-something, she's out of college, has debt, doesn't wanna move in with her parents. She finds this job at this milking farm where she's gonna finally get health insurance and all the good stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, "Okay, I'm on board, like, let's do this." But the entire time, like, I was reading it, I was just, like, in my head being like, "Okay, so she's in this room that's underneath, and he's like, okay, is he in like a massage chair kind of
Mhm.
thing with the hole for. And then she's like reaching up. Like the whole time I was just trying to envision it. And I'm like, I'm like, I really hope she does have good health insurance because I'm like, that's a major repetitive strain if she has to be like reaching up and then like, all
Mhm.
that things. And I just couldn't get out of my head with that. And it's just stuck there.
Oh my god, 100%. Like, I think everyone has those books where it's like, there's, like, one kind of smaller detail just based on what we know in our own lives that, like, you're like, "I can't get past this. I know everyone loves it, but there's just this one thing that's, like, keeping me from, like, fully being immersed." So, yeah, I 100% get that. I 100% get the idea, like, it is interesting world building, you know what I mean? Of, like, okay, like, what do these rooms look like? I kind of pictured him up on like a what is the thing where it's like in warehouses where it's like the lifting platforms. I don't know if you need to get like to
Oh,
a
yeah.
shelf. He's on
Mhm.
I pictured him on
Like a
one of those.
forklift kinda
Ex
thing? Like
Yeah, kind
okay.
of. And where his like dick is kind of eye level to her, where it's like easy. She's not reaching up over her head all the time, like a sound person, like
Right.
holding one of those microphones. They have the machines that kind of start off the process and then, like, she's there to, like, finish off the job. That's just what I pictured, but
Okay.
I have a feeling, like, there are people who are like, "Wait, what is going on?" And I get it. I 100% get it.
That was totally me because I'm like, "Okay," and then she's gotta, like, fill this thing, and her pay is based on how much she can fill, and
Mhm.
I just wanted to get in this to be mindless and have some but I'm, like, obsessing over her technique and how she does
I get it. I get it. I feel the same way when I read a book that takes place in Hollywood, or like where I live or people in like the entertainment industry. There's some
Right.
things that And I'm like, "Oh, they wouldn't get a meeting like that," or like, "Oh, it wouldn't take them 45 minutes to get there." You know what I mean? Like, you just
Yes.
can't get past I totally get it.
Yes, yes. And I even thought like, that was one where I thought it was kind of sweet. And like you said, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what it felt like, a hallmarky kind of town, like you said,
Mhm,
where I was like, oh, I was waiting for a little bit more spice with the Minotaur, but it was
mhm.
good. It was super cute. Loved it. Would you say though that you tend to find more on the spicier, or is it more a good mix?
I usually find them more on the spicier. It's funny because I just had this thought of like, I find sex with monsters to be really spicy to begin with. So, like, even a scene where it's like, if it's like a story, and this is why I love reading this genre so much because it is like, well, does the creature make the spice or is it the act or whatever? This is why I love this genre so much, asking these questions because because like if it's just like missionary sex with Frankenstein or whatever, like I guess that isn't so spicy, but is it spicy because it is Frankenstein and we're kind of not Frankenstein or an orc or whoever,
Yeah, yeah,
that we
yeah.
are kind of like sexualizing this horrifying, just traditionally horrifying kind of being in our culture.
Good questions. Yeah, true. I don't know. It could be both. Yeah.
Mhm.
Very, very fair. So, if someone is new to monster romance and just wants to, like, dive, put their feet in, check it out, do you have a particular recommendation that's really good for a newbie?
Newbies. Well, I feel like if a newbie were to just Google, monster romance to just start, you'll probably find your Ruby Dixon and Finley Fenn. And I think Ruby Dixon is good. Finley Fenn is one of my favorite authors. I love the Orc Sworn series. It is like very, again, there's a lot of fluids involved. There's a breeding kink. There's, all of that. And so I'd say I think it's a good foray into the world, but if you, like, really do need, like, your hand held more, I think, like, Honey Phillips does a good job. I also think that Kara Wilde is coming up with, like, some really fun kind of scenarios, like, just, like, taking, I don't know, like, taking so and so and putting them in like, making them an alien. So now there's, like, orc aliens and, like, combining monsters, I guess, like, combining
Okay, yeah, yeah.
mythologies, which is becoming a lot of fun. And then, yeah, there's Naomi Lucas and Mel Braxton, right, 2 books, 2 series together called The Monsters Duet, and that's the Gargoyles Delight, and that's the Scarecrow book that is
Nice.
next in my TBR list.
Nice. I'm loving it. Yay. Well, in addition to Morning Glory Milking Farm that I checked out, and that was in her Cambric Creek series, I guess.
Mhm.
I haven't checked out more. I should circle back to it. But I recently ventured into, did you read My Chameleon Mate by
No.
Susan Trombley?
No, I want to now.
Hey, it's in Kindle Unlimited. So this one is about a woman, Vera is the heroine. So I think she's living at a time, obviously, in the future where I think Earth has already sort of experienced other life forms or something to
Mhm,
that effect. So she just got married to this pretty asshole man of a husband. They're off on some ship for their honeymoon. He's a cheapskate, like just bought
mhm,
like the worst like accommodations and doesn't like take into her interests. And he's like, we're gonna go on this expedition to like explore this new world that no one's ever been before. Supposedly it's unsanctioned. So she goes, ends up finding him hooking up with the pilot. So she's in this escape pod and accidentally pushes the button and
mhm.
whoops, she goes down to the
I love
surface.
this.
And she lands in this spot where this chameleon guy, I forget his name, is living. He's sort of been banished from his clan or whatever. And they obviously cannot communicate with one
Mhm,
another, but he ends up saving her from a particular something. I won't spoil it. And then, pretty much from moment one,
mhm.
she's like, huh. And how many prompts do you have? And
I love it.
and I think I'm attracted to you. So let's, like
Mhm.
get it on. And he's been living by himself. So he's equally attracted. I loved it,
Yeah.
actually. He was, let's see, what did he look like? I wrote it down. He was green, had these
Mhm.
like thick quills on his head, these big black eyes, scaled green horn, clawed hands, really long tail that comes into the action.
Of course, prehensile tail, it's how I
I
learned what
mean,
that word
right?
is.
3 things all in action at one point, like,
Dear
okay.
Lord, love it.
And it was awesome because I liked the whole fact that they couldn't communicate, like, with words that either one would recognize, and he was, like, super sweet,
Mhm.
like, wanted to, like, protect her, totally fell for her, was looking for his mate,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. She was somewhat clueless, but, like, equally reckless and was just like, I have found that man. Who cares that I just got married?" So it was
Mhm.
adorable. Like, yeah.
Yeah. That sounds fantastic. That sounds like yeah, I'm definitely adding that to the TBR list after my scarecrow,
Yeah. Chameleon. Like, I was just like,
Yeah.
I need to, like, see what this is all about, and I think let me see, in her series, she also has the scorpion's mate,
Okay. Mhm.
okay? The kraken's mate,
Kraken, I definitely wanna read.
yeah.
Yeah.
Serpent's mate,
Mhm.
and then my aunt monster.
Okay, another ant thing, another bug thing. Yeah, bugs really are, like, the thing that, like, because I read, like, a Mothman romance, and that
Oh,
moth
yeah.
had, like, kind of is a bug monster, it's so interesting. I feel like maybe I'm not the only one with, like, this weird aversion/sexual attraction to bugs, I don't know.
And yet, it must be really fun as an author to just, like, go down this whole rabbit hole, right? Like,
Mhm.
thinking about what they look like, again, like, how things work, like you said, or even just the little details. Like, I think his 2 prods, like, they were heart-shaped, I'm
Ooh.
like, "Okay, sure, let's add that little detail in."
Yeah.
Like, how
I think what I find so impressive with that is that even if it's like an abduction story or, some sort of element where our human protagonist is like in some sort of dire situation that we would never want to be in. We're marooned on a planet. We're
Yeah.
captured in an orc mountain. There is something about the orc monster or like the monster bodies or the planet or the kingdom where there is something that solves one of our problems on Earth. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Whether it's their dick looks like a, rabbit toy or, there's like always other things where it's like, oh, if you're injured, you just jump into this bath and then you're healed. And it's like that would be amazing. Like I know that they're in this prison jail on space, but like I would love a healing bath.
Yes. You're right. You're so right. Yeah. And I guess to your point, I just realized, like, a lot of the ones I've read, like, the heroine is she might be a very strong, you know, female voice, but
Mhm.
she's, like, down on her luck for some reason. Like,
Yeah, that is a common thing
yeah.
where, and I'm thinking and this is something I've been thinking about because, like, sometimes I think about writing my own. It's never gonna
Oh,
happen. It's never gonna happen. I'm telling
on.
you.
Come
Like,
on.
because 'cause I'm kind of like, everyone's doing it so well, but sometimes when I think about, like, "Oh, what would my story be?" Like, I think, like, to make these books maybe a little more palatable, like, the idea of being abducted from Earth by aliens is horrifying. Like, we all have families and jobs and loved ones and things like that. So, I think making these female protagonists or, the human protagonists not as tethered to the world that they're in kind of makes the story more palatable
Mhm.
and it also makes you kind of I think it's smart because it makes you root for the love story, like, you're not worried about, like, "But her mom and her job and, this and that," like, it kind of is, like it for me, it makes it, like, kind of I'm not focused on the things that would, like, stress me out in the reality of a quote, unquote,
Yes.
"situation" like this.
And you have a different eye to the, monster protagonist, right?
Mhm.
That you're like, "Oh, yes, I want him or whoever to help this female protagonist who's abducted or has a shitty husband or
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
has no money," whatever it is. Yeah,
Mhm.
that it makes it a little more palatable to be like, "Yes, I do wanna see, them together because, for that very reason." Yeah.
They question each other and they challenge each other, and I think what's so fascinating and I mean, this is what I discovered when I read, like, Ice Planet Barbarians is that, like, the aliens, like, they are questioning, like, "Well, like, what do you mean? What is this patriarchy on your planet Earth? Women can't do what they want?" And, of course, you're just like, "This is the sexiest motherfucker." You know what I mean? Like and so, like, even though these books are, again, like, it's about the romance, it's about, the spice depending on the author, I do think that, like, it is, like, these books do question the structures that we've built, and, because the aliens or the monsters are questioning the structures that we've built, and it does make you question things. Is it,
Yeah.
again, as I said, like, tails going in buttholes for sex? Yes, but it's also that too.
Right, exactly. Well, having read so many, do you see like there's something missing that you feel like you could add, or what do you want to
Mm.
see that you haven't found yet or that maybe you can write one day?
Yeah, it's a good question because, like, I think maybe the reason why I was like, "Should I write one?" is that I had Kate Spencer on the show who she just came out with One Last Summer, which was such a great book. There no aliens, but there's a reference to monster romance. But she was actually the one who got me into Finley Fen, and so she loves that stuff. When we were talking about, like, what would happen if, like, one of us were one of the women, like, who got abducted with, like, the women on Ice Planet Barbarians, and I was like, "I would be the one everyone would complain about. I have no survival skills. I can't live without coffee. I need my own bathroom." It's just like I have all of these like amenities that I need that like I would be the one that the other people would complain about. They're like, "Oh, Becky again." And so I think there's something about that that I would love to read, like just someone who is just not equipped. Their only skill for some reason is like, I don't know, cross stitching, but for some reason the cross stitching at the end of the day saves the crisis. Like that's just like I wanna see like, I think there's a lot of characters that it's like, "Oh, thank God you learned how to hunt growing up," or like, "Oh, thank God that your parents were doomsday preppers so you know how to forage." Like, I don't think that's a lot of us, and so,
Right.
like, it's like, well, what if one of us were in that situation?
And who would be your monster of choice then?
Oh, this is a good question.
I
I mean,
know.
right now, my latest is gargoyles because gargoyles with the wings, they have instant blankets, and I really like that.
Ooh,
So
yes.
yeah, so that's been my latest thing of just like feeling protected, feeling warm if you're cold. Like if you're outside, you forgot a sweater, it gets cold. He puts his wing around you. Like, oh,
Oh, yes. Okay, what's a gargoyle that we need to put on our CVR list?
I'm thinking about a gargoyle's delight. I
Okay.
recommend. Yeah, and if anyone has recommendations for more gargoyle romance for me, because I just got into gargoyles, so it's been on my to-do list to read, and so yeah, if anyone has any recommendations, I will take them.
Send them your way. Perfect.
Please. Yeah.
Do you have any other recommendations that you wanna offer readers while we have you?
Sure. Yeah. I feel like, oh, okay. Let me see. I feel like I did talk a lot about them, but right now, for our mutual friend Laura Yumine, I'm helping her come up with like an orc list. So I've been reading orc books all this month. So I will say Heart of an Orc is
Okay.
something that has been sticking with me. It's again very hallmarky, but the main character in that book is my current book boyfriend. It's about a single mom who, comes in with her baby, and you have the orc just be the best father to this baby. And it's like, I don't usually seek out like books like that. Like, I'm not one to seek out, like, oh, it's a single mom and like this child has no parental figure, only one parental figure. So it's not enough. It's not usually my cup of tea, but seeing this orc become so protective of this baby and so worried of this baby in a way that I related to when, like, I was first taking care of my niece, like, freaking out about, like, "Oh my god, she just blinked. Do I call 911?" And seeing an orc do that was just, like, I loved it. It was so good.
Awesome. That is definitely making the TBR list for
Yeah.
sure. Yay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I definitely yeah, if you like the CM Nacosta kind of small town romancy kind of stuff, it's not I will say it's not as spicy, and that's surprised me, but it worked for me. They're short, they're just short, fun reads.
Yeah, perfect. I will put those all in my show notes for people to snag. A few more on my list that I kind of quickly thought, oh, I'm going to check these out. I love Katie Robert because she
Yes.
definitely brings the spice. So I
Oh,
haven't really
yeah.
read any of her monster ones. So The Dragon's Bride, I'm
I
like,
I
I
did read
want.
that.
You
Yeah.
did? Okay.
Yeah. I will say that, like, that was, like, one of the first books that I kind of, like, helped me to understand what, like, a breeding fetish was. Like, I know what it is theoretically,
Right.
but
Right.
to see it put in action, I guess, that's a book I think about every day too, just about, like, the politics of, human society and just, like, seeing, like, what we're made for, how we're appreciated as women. Like, I don't know. I think all of Katie Ribert's books are fantastic, but yeah, that definitely I recommend that one.
She's like auctioned off, right? Or something like that. The
Mhm.
heroine
Yeah.
of the ring. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And she, like, goes in to make a deal, and I love those kinds of stories, particularly with monsters of, like, a human woman coming in, is making some sort of deal, is taking advantage of the monster and its monstrosity somehow to get ahead, and seeing a monster become really vulnerable and be like, "You're taking advantage of me, and I am a being, I breathe air just like you do." It it is I do love that plot line.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. I'm gonna check that one out. Few others that I had written down because orcs came on my mind was Cookies for My Orc Neighbor
Okay,
by
that's yes.
John
Mhm.
Mild. Okay.
Yeah, that's in the same series as I think it's in the same series as the Honey Phillips. I think it's like a bunch of different Monster Treats series. It's a few different authors. So yeah, great series. Read it, read it, read it.
Perfect. How about Getting It On with the Gargoyles by
Mm,
Hazel Mack?
I'm reading that.
I mean, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I thought, okay, I gotta like switch off for a different monster. Stalked by the Kraken by Lillian Lark. Although he's not really a Kraken 24/7.
Mhm.
He's sort of like man by day, I think, whatever. But I'm like, okay, Kraken. I want to see.
Why not?
Why
Yeah,
not? You
bring
know,
in the Kraken, isn't that the phrase? I don't know.
right?
But yeah, Kraken is on my list of things to read as well. I 'Cause, like, there is a part of me that's like, "Oh, I don't is slime my thing? I really gotta get over it." But see, that's another fear. I did the spider
Oh, yeah.
stuff. Let me get over the slime stuff, you know?
Yeah. Yes. Embrace all the fluids and
Exactly.
stuff. Exactly.
Exactly.
Well, and again, not like we were talking earlier, not to get into too particulars, but a very, very palatable monster romance I just read, Under Lock and Key by Lana Ferguson. So this is kind of just one of those like contemporary slash, yes, he's a monster part of the time book. So,
Mhm.
but this might be a good like, okay, let me see how I feel about somebody changing and working with some of those different body parts and
Mhm.
seeing. But it was cute because she kind of takes a different look at what if the Loch Ness monster was really a man who was cursed, right? And
Mm.
from sundown to sunup, he turns into this dinosaur like monster.
Wow, it's like, how do you make it work? And you do.
You do. Or,
Yeah.
it was more of I won't spoil it, but we do get a time or two. So yeah,
Mhm. Nice.
it was very good. Yes. Well, when you're not reading monster romance, what else do you like to read?
I have been into just a nice contemporary rom-com with a very flawed heroine. So I read Emily Henry's Funny Story over the summer and I loved it. And I read most recently it was How to End a Love Story by Yulin Quang, which was so fantastic. I highly recommend it. That one was like when when you need something really human, like that was a really good book to read. So it was like it was yeah, it was good.
That's a very good description of it because I didn't really know much going into it, but
Mhm.
it's a little heavy, than
Yeah.
oh, I shouldn't say a
And
little. It is heavy.
it is, and it was, like, one of those things where like, we all know how romances are gonna end, like, obviously, and I think the fun of reading it is like, "Okay, how are they gonna work this out?" I felt in this book more so than anything, I'm like, can this work? Like, holy shit,
Yeah.
can it?" You're really
Yes.
kept on the edge of your seat, and and I'm crying as well, like, it's a tearjerker, but, like, a good one. It's, like,
Mhm.
not in a bad way.
Yes. No, exactly. That was a really good book. Cool. Well, it sounds like you kinda like to dabble into it all, right? Yeah.
I I love everything. I'm always looking for recommendations, which is why I love your blog and your podcast so much. So yeah, I need to keep going.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Can you tell people where they can find your podcast or where to find you online so they
Yeah.
can
So once
follow more?
again, the podcast is Too Stupid to Live. It's available on all the podcast platforms. I'm on social media on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter if you're still on or X or I don't know, but it's at TSTL podcast.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts and recommendations on monster romance. I mean, whoever's ready to dive in, we are like ready to go now with all of those. So thank you.
Yay! I hope everyone enjoys it.
That's all for this episode of the She Reads Romance Books podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and found some new books to add to your TBR list. If you did, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast app. It really helps me reach more romance book lovers like you, and I appreciate your support. If you're a book boyfriend collector like me, then you'll want to join my email list so you never miss a podcast episode or a new book list. Just visit shereadsromancebooks.com/join and sign up today. As a thank you, I'll instantly send you my list of top 10 book boyfriends that will make you swoon. Trust me, you don't want to miss this list. Thank you for listening, and until next time, happy reading.